So we are also very honored today to have several elected officials with us who I'd like to recognize. State Representative Terry Wood, who represents Darien and Norwalk. If you could just stand up. State Representative Matt Blumenthal, who represents parts of Stamford and Darien. And State Representative Lucy Dathan, who I hope made it in from the parking lot. Yes, Lucy! Who represents New Canaan and Norwalk. Thank you both for joining us. And we also have two members of our Board of Education, I think. I know Tara Achman, who's our board chairman, is here. Tara? And I know we were expecting Jill McCammon. I'm not sure if she's... Oh, there. Jill, stand up. Thank you. Just a heads up, Channel 79 is filming our event today, so thank you very much, Channel 79. And we have Sandy Fox, who's the assistant editor of the Darien Times, who's sitting at table 2. So if anyone says anything that you might regret, please follow it by, that was off the record. We also would like to thank Palmer's, who graciously lent us these beautiful orchids that are on the tables today. And if anyone is interested in taking one home, please see Yvonne after the luncheon and just hand her $20. We hope that you enjoy our luncheon today and will consider joining the League of Women Voters, either here in Darien or in your community. The work done by the All-Volunteer League in voter education and engagement is critical, and it is made possible by the generosity of a membership, which isn't all that expensive, and the brochures are on a table in the back if you'd like to take one with you. And finally, like every year, this is an election year. If you aren't registered to vote, it's not too late. If you know someone who isn't registered to vote, please help them get registered to vote. It's very easy. You can do it, I believe, online now, and even by going into your registrar of voters office. I want to thank you all for joining us today in what is the start of a year-long celebration of the 100th anniversary of the National League of Women Voters and the 100th anniversary of the ratification of the 19th Amendment, whereby women earned the right to vote. Not all women initially. That took years to be achieved. Over the next several months, the Darien League will be offering programming that recognizes and celebrates how women use their power to bring about change in our society. So please check our website for announcements of upcoming programs. And in fact, I'll mention 2 very quickly so you all have a heads up. On October 2nd, we are welcoming Denise Merrill, who's the Secretary of State here in Connecticut. She's going to be talking to us about the upcoming election and election integrity in our state, which is a hot topic nationally. And then on June 2nd, definitely mark your calendars for this, we have Rebecca Traister, the author of All the Single Ladies and Good and Mad, who's going to be speaking to us at the Darien Library, who's also co-sponsoring the event with us. It's free and open to the public. Oh my gosh, thank you so much. Mae Flexer, where are you? Please stand up. I am so sorry. I knew you were coming. She's one of our state senators from Killingly, and I'm so embarrassed. So where was I? So the other piece of information about the June 2nd event, in addition to the library being one of our sponsors, Barrett Bookstore is also our sponsor, and they'll be making Rebecca's book available for sale. And I really want to give a special thank you to them, and I hope you will join me in thanking them as well. They're terrific partners. They're an amazing local bookstore, and so much of what we're able to do with the League and finding great speakers, like our speaker today and other speakers that we've had, is a direct result of our partnership with Barrett Bookstore. So thank you, Libby and Paige, for being here, and for the staff at Barrett Bookstore. So now we can get to our featured speaker. As women, we have been told that our emotions, particularly our anger, is a disqualifier. It makes us irrational, unreliable, incapable of handling difficult situations, remaining calm in a crisis, of being able to lead. The reality, however, is very different. History is filled with examples, from workplace protection, civil rights, equality, to education, the environment, and gun safety, where women have channeled their anger into power and that power into change. Our speaker today exemplifies this very truth. In the wake of the unimaginable tragedy at Sandy Hook, when our state, our nation, and the world were awash in grief and anguish, Shannon Watts took action. She started a Facebook page inviting others who believed as she did that our country can and should do better to join her in fighting for common sense gun safety laws. Today, Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America is a nonpartisan grassroots movement with 6 million volunteers and a chapter in every state. Her book, Fight Like a Mother, How a Grassroots Movement Took on the Gun Lobby and Why Women Will Change the World, and I know that we all believe that that is in fact going to happen. Chronicles the ups and downs, successes and failures, challenges and obstacles, laughter and tears associated with building an organization of this magnitude, scope, and power. It is a moving story of perseverance, courage, compassion, and strength, and a how-to guide to bringing activism to every day, and an inspiration to anyone who wants to work to bring about change and channel their values into action. It is my privilege and honor, and personally, I am incredibly humbled to introduce Shannon Watts. Sorry, there'll be time at the end of Shannon's talk for questions.
Thank you so much. That is a really big step, but I did it. I'm so honored to be here today. This is such a beautiful event, and I'm so grateful that there's so many lawmakers here in the room, because they are what have helped work with us hand in hand to make all of our progress happen. This has been a really tough summer in this country for gun violence, and so when I get started, I always want to make sure I'm acknowledging any gun violence survivors in the room. When you're in an average room in America, usually about 50% of the people in that room have been impacted by gun violence. So if you are comfortable acknowledging that and raising your hand, if you are a gun violence survivor in this room today, would you please let us acknowledge that? Okay, that is very surprising. And sometimes people don't necessarily want to talk about being a survivor, but the other thing to remember is that if you've been impacted by gun suicide, you are also a gun violence survivor. About 2/3 of gun violence in this country is gun suicide. I also want to acknowledge all of the people, particularly women, who are doing the unglamorous heavy lifting of grassroots activism in this room. So first, if you are a Moms Demand Action volunteer, please raise your hand. Amazing. Thank you so much. And we also have our chapter leader, Alexis. She's at the table 1, if anyone wants to follow up with her about getting involved afterward. And if you are a gun violence prevention advocate, please raise your hand. So thank you so much for all that you're doing. I wrote the book Fight Like a Mother really for 3 reasons. The first was I wanted it to be part memoir. I get asked all the time, what is it like to be the tip of the spear on such a volatile issue? I never imagined that would be what I ended up doing with my life. So I wanted to put on paper talking about the death threats and the threats of sexual violence that started immediately after starting this Facebook page to me, to my daughters. I wanted to make it part manual. I get asked so often by people, how do I do something like Moms Demand Action in my community or in my state where I live? And so I wanted to put it on paper, and I always say because I'm perimenopausal, the thoughts do not stay there long, so I really had to go back and search and make sure it was all written down. But I also wanted it to be part manifesto. And by that I mean it is so important for women in this country to move from not just shaping policy, but to actually making it. We only hold about 17% of the 500,000 elected positions in this country. And it's really important, as they say, if you don't have a seat at the table, you're probably on the menu. And we see that time and time again on so many issues in this country. And that's why I spend so much of my job, my volunteer job, encouraging other women to run for office in this country. And in the book, I talk about the different lessons that I have learned over the last almost 6.5 years of doing this work. And really the first lesson, one of the most important lessons I learned, is that you have to build the plane while you fly it. When I started Moms Demand Action, it was because I was angry. I was angry that 20 children and 6 educators could be slaughtered in the sanctity of an American elementary school. I was a mother of 5 living in suburban Indiana. I had never heard of a place called Newtown, Connecticut, when I was folding laundry that day, and the news started coming in that there was an active shooter. And I can remember kind of looking up and saying, "Dear God, don't let this be as bad as it seems." And as we all know now, almost 7 years later, it's worse really than I can even fathom still to wrap my mind around what happened in that school. And like all of you, I was devastated that day. But what happened and what made me so angry was that pundits and politicians started coming on the TV and saying the solution to what had happened was more guns. That somehow 400 million guns in this country in the hands of civilians just wasn't enough. And that teachers needed to be armed, and there others needed to be armed that day, and this would never have happened. And I knew nothing about gun laws, gun violence, activism, organizing. I only knew that our nation was broken. And I also knew I had 2 choices. One was to try to figure out how to move a family of 7 to another country, which is very difficult. But the other was to stay and fight. And I really had no idea what that meant that day. But I thought, okay, I'll start a Facebook page. And I really wanted to be part of a badass army of women working on this issue. You know, I was a teen in the 80s when Mothers Against Drunk Driving was so pivotal. Suddenly, people who would drive drunk with their families or friends and kill or injure them went from being, we can't punish them, they've suffered enough, to really becoming social pariahs because of angry moms across the country who said, you know, laws are the moral underpinning of our society, and if we don't hold people accountable for this behavior, it will continue to happen. So I went online, I started a Facebook page from my kitchen in Indiana. I had 75 Facebook friends, so I was not a social media phenomenon. I don't know who I thought I was going to talk to, but what happened, and I know you'll find this shocking, was that Type A women immediately found it, and it was like lightning in a bottle. You people were Googling me and emailing me and calling me and saying, how can I do this where I live? How can I create something like Mothers Against Drunk Driving in my state? And that is what we did. I mean, we just started sort of organically growing, first on social media and then offline. And many of the skills that we have as mothers, and I get asked this question all the time, why moms demand action? Why not women or parents or others? And for me, it was this idea that the gun lobby had made a group of gun extremists afraid that their guns would be taken away. But as mothers, there are 80 million of us in this country. Regardless of political party, we are afraid our children will be taken away. And I really felt that that was the emotion that would win at the end of the day. I mean, if you look at organizing throughout history, it really is women and mothers who have been on the front lines. The secret sauce of organizing, starting with Prohibition when temperance was considered a Christian value, through child labor laws, through expanding civil and voting rights, all the way up to the water crisis in Flint, Michigan. And so it was that I believed would help be the turning point on this issue. And when I talk about building the plane as we flew it, I didn't wait until I knew everything there was that I needed to know to get started. I could have waited until I knew more about gun laws or organizing, but the moment would have passed. And I think as women, we often feel that we need to be perfect, that we can't make mistakes, that we have to wait until all the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted before we can jump in. And too often we miss the moment because of that. So I started working with a group of women I had never met in my entire life all across the country to just jump in and to have faith in one another and to believe that we could build this movement. And here we are. Almost 7 years later, we have a chapter in every single state of the country. We have hundreds of thousands of volunteers, 6 million supporters. We're bigger than the NRA. And that's all because of the power of moms. other lesson I talk about in my book is this idea of losing forward, that failure is feedback. And again, I don't think women like to lose a lot, but when you get involved in activism, it is a marathon. It's not a sprint. And you're going to have a lot of losses along the way, especially when you get involved in taking on one of the most powerful and wealthy special interests in the history of this country. And we lost early, frankly. We started working on Mansion Toomey. We'd gotten a call from the White House, and they said, we have been waiting for women and mothers to organize in this country for a long time. We need you to help us pass this bill. And Mansion Toomey was a bipartisan bill that would have closed the background check loophole. And essentially, for those of you who don't know, licensed gun sales in this country require a background check. Unlicensed sales do not. And that's how millions of guns are sold to felons and domestic abusers every single year. And so in honor of what had happened in Sandy Hook, Senators Toomey and Manchin put this bill together. And we thought this was going to be easy, right? Surely they're going to do something after this horrific tragedy. This is a no-brainer, but we will activate around this, and we will work and make it happen. And we started meeting with our senators in district. We went on our own dime to D.C. We had something called Moms Take the Hill, and we felt very confident that this would get passed. It was months and months of work. I was sitting in the Senate gallery in April of 2013, watching senator after senator vote against this bill, including a handful of Democratic senators. By the way, not one of them still has their job. But the reason they said afterward, and the bill failed by 6 votes, the reason they said they voted against it was because they hadn't heard from our side. They'd only heard from the other side. Again, someone like Senator Heidi Heitkamp, a Democrat, a mom, a woman, voted against Mansion Toomey, which she knew her constituents supported. But the NRA had gotten so good at motivating and activating their supporters to generate emails and calls and outrage. And we just had been outwomaned, if you will. And so we vowed to never let that happen again, but at the same time, we thought, this is such a huge loss. Can we recover from this? Is the country ready for this? Should we just go back to our normal lives and give up? I mean, there were definitely moments of thinking that. But again, type A women saved the day, and they pivoted intuitively and started doing this work in their state houses and in their boardrooms, where some governors were willing to act on this issue, like here in Connecticut and in Colorado and in Delaware and Maryland and other states where they would pass sweeping gun reform legislation that would save lives. We didn't realize that we would have to play defense so often and kill bad bills. So this was the work we needed to be doing in state houses and boardrooms, and we never would have realized that. We never would be where we are right now if we hadn't lost the Mansion Toomey vote. The other piece of the work that we do is cultural. So Starbucks, for example, the reason we worked on Starbucks was because we had lost Mansion Toomey. And I can remember watching television in June of 2013. Again, we were so small, we had just started. And they announced that they were going to stop allowing cigarettes and electronic cigarettes 20 feet outside their stores, regardless of state law. And we had seen people open carrying all across the country. Open carry is legal in 45 states. Taking AR-15s in to get a latte. Especially on February 2nd, which they consider Second Amendment Day. And they wanted to honor Starbucks by open carrying inside their stores. So I called them and I said, well, are you still going to allow guns and open carry inside your stores? And they said yes, they were going to still follow the law as it came to guns. We were much more afraid of secondhand bullets than secondhand smoke. So we embarked on what we called a mom cot. And we were so small that we could only skip Starbucks Saturdays. We couldn't even do a full economic boycott. And soccer moms were mad at me about that, I will be honest. But we used the hashtag Skip Starbucks Saturdays and showed where we were having coffee at their competitors or at our homes. And we made images of open carry go viral, because as soon as we started pushing on gun extremists, they started pushing right back. In fact, over a dozen of them showed up with everything from handguns to AR-15s at a Sioux Falls Starbucks, and there was nothing management could do. And suddenly, 3 months later, Howard Schultz came out on national television and said, guns are no longer welcome inside our stores. 3 months. That's all it took, this very small group of moms. And so we realized that that was a lever of power we could pull. We only hold 20% of the state lawmaking position, or the lawmaking positions in this country. We only hold 5% of Fortune 1000 CEO positions, but we're the majority of the voting electorate, and we make about 80% of the spending decisions for our families. And that is something we never would have realized had it not been for the Manchin-Toomey loss. And there's one more loss I'd love to talk about, because this is such a great story, because it happened in Arkansas. I would go to Arkansas every couple of years, and it was sort of the same handful of nice women I met with every time. They weren't growing. As you can imagine, this isn't the best issue to get involved in Arkansas. And what happened was we suffered a huge loss there. A guns on campus bill sailed through the State House, and it was signed by the governor with the chief NRA lobbyist standing next to him. It allowed guns in Razorback Stadium where alcohol is served. It was a huge loss. And it so motivated angry women and moms. We grew from about 2 local groups to over 24, almost overnight across the state. And they were able to use that newfound political power and go in and carve out an exemption so that guns could not be in Razorback Stadium. But even better, the next year, 2 of our volunteers ran for office. One was a university professor, and she won her race. The other one was a retired nurse for 15 years who ran against the man that put the guns on campus bill forward, and she beat him by 12 points. Then this year, they have become such a political powerhouse in Arkansas that they were able to stop a stand your ground bill twice with a Republican supermajority. And the state lawmakers there said that the NRA's agenda is too extreme for the state of Arkansas. So that is huge progress. The other lesson that we learned along the way is that we have to build a big tent. We are a moderate, research-based, bipartisan organization willing to create relationships with whoever it takes to get this done. We are open to people changing their hearts and minds, because we're not going to unelect everyone who opposes us. We're just not. But we have found that we can change hearts and minds. And a big part of that is making sure that we are diverse, that we're focused on equality and inclusiveness. When I started Moms Demand Action, I was a stay-at-home, white, suburban mom. And I was scared my kids weren't safe in their schools. I was living in a bubble. I didn't realize that over 100 Americans are shot and killed in this country every single day. And that isn't just school shootings and mass shootings. In fact, that's 1% of all gun violence in this country. It's the daily gun homicides in city centers. It's the daily gun suicides in rural communities. It's unintentional shootings. And we realized that we needed to care about all of it and fix all of it. And that takes a commitment to making sure that your leadership and your volunteers are as diverse as they can possibly be. That has been a long-term effort for us. What happened was, after the Parkland shooting, we tripled in size as an organization. And just to put it in perspective for you, Mothers Against Drunk Driving has about 15,000 active volunteers. They've been around for decades. We have 300,000 approximately. So we tripled in size, but the people who came into the organization again looked like me. So that is a lesson for me, which is we have to work on this all the time. It never goes away. I'm incredibly proud of the fact that last year over 40% of our hires were non-white, and we've started partnering with community organizations that have been doing this work unseen for decades. Women, and especially women of color, who put their physical bodies on street corners to interrupt gun violence. The other way to have a big tent is also a lot of religious outreach that we do to religious communities across the country. I'm incredibly proud of the fact that one of our Dallas volunteers just became the first Presbyterian minister of gun violence prevention in the entire country. And we will continue to work across religious lines, because if you say that your agenda is pro-life, that has to include gun violence prevention. And then the other piece of it is politics. We have plenty of gun owners in our organization, women who are gun owners or they're married to gun owners, and we are just about restoring responsibility that goes along with gun rights. We're not anti-gun. We're not out to overturn the Second Amendment. In fact, we have a program called Be Smart. if you've heard of it. And we educate people about responsible gun storage. 4.6 million children in America live in homes with unsecured guns, meaning they are unlocked, they are loaded, and they are easily accessible. And so it doesn't matter if you're a gun owner or a non-gun owner. We should all be able to agree that children should never be around loaded guns that aren't secured. And so we created this program, and we partnered with the PTA, and we have worked so hard to talk to people about responsible gun ownership. In fact, something I'm really proud of is 2 weeks ago, the Los Angeles School District sent home a voicemail, an email, and a permission slip with 700,000 students. It's the largest school district in the country, requiring those parents and those families to learn about responsible gun storage. And that was because Moms for Human Action volunteers insisted that they do something to educate kids about this crisis and their families. So all of this work, and really I'm just sort of skimming the surface. Hopefully you have the book and you can read more about it, and the proceeds of the book do go to gun violence prevention organizations. All of this work created a movement that could go toe-to-toe with the gun lobby. I get asked all the time, well, if nothing happened after Sandy Hook, don't you think nothing ever can? And the fact that we happened after Sandy Hook is so miraculous and important and powerful. But also, keep in mind that the Congress we had the day before the Sandy Hook tragedy is the same Congress we had the day after. And we really had to build political power that enabled us, even though we were the David to the NRA's Goliath, to go after them. And so I travel all across the country with one very important message, and if you take nothing else away today, please let it be this: we are winning. We are winning this battle every single day in state houses and in boardrooms. If you look at the progress we've made in just 6.5 years, we have now passed background checks in 21 states. Only 14 had them in 2012. We have passed red flag laws, something that allows family and police to petition a judge to get a temporary restraining order to remove the guns from someone who's a danger to themselves or someone else. In 17 states, 12 of those have passed in just the last year. And we have passed laws in the last 6.5 years in 28 states that disarm domestic abusers. That is life-saving work. And last year alone, in 2018, we passed laws in 20 states that was sweeping gun reform legislation. 9 of those laws were passed by Republican governors, which goes to show you that they can work in a bipartisan way in state houses. It's something we're not seeing, unfortunately, in our Senate. But it is working in the state houses. And the other piece of it is defense, which I mentioned earlier. Every year, the gun lobby puts up the same bills. Permitless carry, by the way, something that's passed in 12 states now, which means you can take a hidden loaded handgun out in public with no permit, which means no background check, no training, no permit. Incredibly dangerous. They try to pass bills that will allow teachers to be armed, and they try to pass bills that will force guns onto college campuses. And by that I mean the public universities have no choice but to opt in. We have a 90% track record of beating those bills back every single year. Last year, we killed over 1,000 NRA bills. So that is a big part of what we do. And as I mentioned before, I think it's so important for women to move from shaping policy to making it. In 2018, 40 of our volunteers ran for office. 17 won, everything from city council to Congress. One of our spokeswomen, Lucy McBath, was a mom in Georgia, a Delta airline attendant. Her son, Jordan Davis, was shot and killed, a black teen, in Florida. He was visiting his dad. He was killed by a white man who said his music was too loud. And Lucy immediately became an activist and started working with Moms for Human Action as a spokeswoman. And along the way, along the years, we became very close friends. And every time we would talk, I would say to her, "So when are you running for office?" That's how I would end every single conversation. And I'll be honest, I assumed like State House. No, Lucy had much bigger ambitions. And she ran for Newt Gingrich's old seat, a seat held by Republicans for 30 years. And she crushed her opponent. And she is now a congresswoman from Georgia. into this congressional session, as a freshman, she co-sponsored H.R. 8, which is the background checks bill. And she's gone on to co-sponsor many other gun safety bills that would, if voted on by the Senate, make our country safer. And so that is part of what we do too, which is to train women to run for office. My favorite thing to talk about is how we've essentially taken down the NRA. We have spent the last 6.5 years, one of our volunteers says our job is to shine a light under the refrigerator and make the cockroaches run out. And I want to be clear, I'm not talking about NRA members, I'm talking about NRA leadership. We know that about 74% of NRA members support stronger gun laws. 80% of gun owners in this country support stronger gun laws. Only 1 in 10 even belongs to the NRA. But the NRA has become so insidious, and the reason is because they are selling more guns to fewer people. And it's an aging out demographic. It's mainly white men over the age of 60. And that's not sustainable for the profit margins that the gun manufacturers have experienced over the decades. If you look back at 1999, Wayne LaPierre, the NRA CEO, said they supported a background check on every gun sale, and they opposed guns in schools. Flash forward 20 years, completely for those things now. And again, the reason is because they have to inculcate guns everywhere in society. How do you do that? Well, you arm just a fraction of the country's 4 million teachers. You force teachers to be armed. You put guns on college campuses. You make people believe that there are guns everywhere for anyone, anytime, no questions asked. And that, make no mistake, was their agenda. Thanks to a lot of scrappy moms, they are now under investigation on several fronts. They are weaker than they have ever been. They are underwater reputationally and financially. And we outspent them in the 2018 midterm elections, a watershed moment for the movement. Going into 2020, I'm feeling very good about our chances against the NRA. I think that we will see that lawmakers, that stranglehold that the NRA has had on them is being released finger by finger. And so 2020 will be an important year for us to organize to elect gun sense candidates to the Senate and to Congress and across the country. So this really is a movement driven by women. Someone asked me about Moms Demand Action, the name. It isn't just moms, it's mothers and others. It's all caring Americans. But what I'm incredibly proud of is that women lead the organization soup to nuts. What I have seen in organizations across the country is so often women do some of the menial tasks of activism. You know, they set up chairs and they make snacks and they get the venues. And then men kind of step up and take the spotlight and set the strategy. No offense to any of the men in the room, I'm sure you don't do that. But I wanted women to be able to work on this issue, again, from beginning to end. And that is really what has taken down the gun lobby, but also passed so many gun safety laws and changed this country's culture of gun violence. The last example I'll give that I'm so incredibly proud of is in the last 2 weeks, over 40 store brands have said they will no longer allow open carry in their stores. And the reason that happened was because after the El Paso shooting, we started having conversations again with Walmart about how they could make their stores safer, and this was something we had pointed out many times to them. In fact, the shooter in El Paso walked in wearing tactical gear and carrying a semi-automatic rifle, and the El Paso chief of police said he didn't break the law until he opened fire. And it isn't up to customers of grocery stores, most of whom are women, or employees to decide who is open carrying and who is about to open fire. It is absurd and obscene. And so we had that conversation with Walmart. They came out and said open carry is no longer safe in our stores. We won't allow it. And other grocery stores followed suit. Kroger, we had been working on for 5 years, finally folded, as did a variety of stores across the country. And again, that is the power of women. So how can all of you get involved? And I won't be offended if you take out your phones to do this. One way you can get involved is to text the word READY to 64433. Again, you can write it down or you can do it now, but and our volunteers are so on it, you might actually get a call while you're still sitting here, but they're not kidding around. Again, the word is READY to 64433, and we will get you involved in any way that you are interested in or see fit electorally, legislatively, or culturally. We also have Students Demand Action now. which has 300 groups across the country. And if you have kids at home, you can tell them to text the word students to 64433. And the other thing that you can do is be educated about who you're voting for. We give out something called the Gun Sense Candidate Distinction. We thought we'd give out a couple hundred. We started it in 2018. Again, Type A women handed them out to everyone in the universe, and we gave out over 3,000 of them to Republicans and Democrats alike. And it's our answer to the NRA's rating system. In fact, the NRA took down their ratings in 2018 because they realized an A rating from them was now a scarlet letter and not a badge of honor. Thankfully, we saved decades of those grades and put them right back up online. But make sure your candidates have a gun sense distinction. Make sure that they support gun safety and hold them accountable if they don't. Show up at town halls, ask them the important questions because, I realize we don't lead single issue lives, but until our children are safe, it is very hard to not be a single issue voter on this subject. So with that, thank you so much for having me here today. It's truly an honor to speak with you, and I would love to take any questions that anyone might have. Thank you. Thank you. You're applauding yourself because you all are doing the hard work. Thank you very much. Sure.
We seem to be in a time where the Senate could vote on a gun bill, but we have Mitch McConnell pointing to the president kind of pointing to McConnell and saying, maybe I'll come out with something in the next couple of days. Where do you think we are?
I know, yeah. Donald Trump's positions on this go around in circles like the windmills he's so afraid of, I always say. He really is a wild card on this issue. We know he supported common sense gun laws before he was president. The NRA gave Donald Trump $30 million to his campaign, more than almost any other outside donor. They did expect a return on their investment, and it's really important to remember that even though they had a Republican president and a Republican Congress for 2 years, the NRA did not pass a single piece of its priority legislation because we kept showing up at the Capitol. But, I don't know. If it doesn't meet the moment, then we're ready to pivot from politics to policy. The opposite, from policy to politics, because this has gone on long enough. And we are not going to settle for half measures or votes that provide political cover. We need a strong background check law, and we need a strong red flag law at the federal level. We know those save lives. We look at states like Connecticut that has strong gun laws, and we see that they work. We look at states like Missouri that have weak gun laws, and we see the enormous amount of gun homicides and gun suicides that spiked since they overturned their laws there. So we know these laws work, and it is time for the federal government to act, and everyone should be just absolutely outraged that they have the power to stop this, and they don't.
Since we're in Connecticut and I work for an insurance company, how much have you gotten the insurance industry involved? Because I feel like when I first started working, I literally counted how many accidental gun deaths we had.
Yes, no, it's a great question. I actually worked in the insurance industry for many years. So that was my first thought when starting the organization. And what's interesting is health insurers and home insurers can't really hold gun owners accountable until the law does, right? So in many cases in this country, if you leave a loaded handgun on your kitchen counter and your child gets it and hurts themselves or someone else, you may be subject to a misdemeanor and a $400 fine. So until there is accountability and liability, then it's difficult for insurers to hold them accountable.
Do they do anything on the advocacy side of it? Because they do all have their own lobbies.
Not out loud yet, but we're getting there. Back there.
Should HR not pass? Can we work together better with other gun violence prevention groups like Gifford and Brady and March for Our Lives? I would love to see us all join hands and just work together as one voice and scream, maybe on Gun Violence Prevention Day, that we demand background checks. And that is one thing that is a little bit confounding is there are other groups out there, and it would be nice to see us occasionally all line up behind something like background checks.
Well, we are. Every single organization is lined up behind background checks. We actually work really well. When you look at all of the different social issues that have a lot of different groups working on them, sometimes it can be very fractured. We have a call every single week with all of the organizations to talk about who's working on what. Sometimes there is nuance. There are certainly organizations to our left. Everything that we do is researched and data driven. And so we often take a more moderate position, but what we have found is that by working together, even if we don't always support the same things, that it does create a holistic movement.
I would just, from my own point of view, it'd be great to see something like on, a Gun Violence Prevention Day, or should this come up for a vote, where we all are lined up together, because some people have said, well, the NRA in the past, and I disabuse them of the notion that it's still this huge, powerful force, but it'd be nice to say, not only is it just moms, but look at all these other groups standing up. So.
Absolutely. So the first weekend of June is Gun Violence Prevention Awareness Weekend, and so we do work with every single organization in the space to talk about the need to solve this crisis in the country. I would argue that we actually do a pretty great job of it, although, I'm sure it varies from state to state.
One of the things that's concerned me, particularly about the background checks, is the focus by some people, certainly the NRA, but also others, that it's a mental health issue. To suggest that everyone that has a gun or anyone that behaves in a violent way is mentally ill really does a lot to go against some of the mental health actions that are taking place, and suggests that those with mental illness are prone to gun violence, and that certainly is not the case.
Right.
So it's a concern of mine, and that's one I wonder if you are addressing, or what your feeling is about those who say mental health and gun background checks are the same thing.
It's a great question. Yeah, this has been an NRA talking point. They seem to come up with new and different things to blame, everything but guns, every time there's a horrific shooting tragedy in this country. In fact, in Texas, after the Santa Fe shooting, they blamed there were too many exit doors, right? So every time it's something unique, but we see mental health being a straw man all the time that they bring out. We look at mental health data, and we know that we have the same rates of mental illness as every other high-income country. What we have that is higher is a 25 times higher gun homicide rate. And the reason for that is not mental illness, it's easy access to guns. People who are mentally ill are much more likely to be victims of violent crime than perpetrators. And mass shooters, only 5% of them show any signs of mental illness before a shooting. White supremacy is not a mental illness. The amount of road rage involving guns doubled in this country between 2015 and 2017. Again, everything points to easy access to guns.
Thank you.
With all the tragedies that have happened recently, what is your sense of the support for gun buyback programs for assault weapons? And does that have to happen at the federal, state level?
So the question is about buyback programs, particularly for semi-automatic rifles. As I mentioned, everything we do is research-based, and so we don't know yet. That's the bottom line. We don't know how effective buyback programs are in actually reducing the amount of gun violence, reducing the amount of gun deaths or injuries. And so it's something that we're studying and looking at. Obviously, that is Beto O'Rourke's policy platform. What I'm so thrilled about is that every single candidate is competing to see who can be the best on this issue, which is a sea change in American politics. You had to prove your gun bona fides before you were allowed to talk about this issue. Saying you were a duck hunter or a skeet shooter or whatever it was, had to sort of bend the knee to the gun lobby before you could say, but I'm also for gun safety. That's out the window. And I'm excited to see whether it's buyback programs or licensing or executive action, whatever it is. Let's throw it out there and let's talk about it and let's have that conversation and let's see what voters want. And then once a candidate is chosen, then we will come in and do research and talk about what's the best way to do it.
In a general sense, how is law enforcement on this issue and working with the organization?
Yeah, law enforcement has been amazing in most states, and they are almost always a part of our coalition to get lawmakers to act on this issue. What's disappointing to me is that you can have lawmakers and educators and physicians and all of these amazing, wise voices, and lawmakers still don't listen. It's so incredibly frustrating to me, but I would say officers have been incredibly supportive and getting more and more supportive as these tragedies occur. One that sticks out in my mind is Art Acevedo. He is the police chief in Houston, and he is constantly banging the drum that this is something that needs to be solved. And the other part of that that's interesting is Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, who was the guy who blamed all the exit doors after Santa Fe. He came out last week and said that he would take the arrow personally for the Texas Republican Party by supporting a background check on every gun sale. So I do think police chiefs are making a difference and moving the needle. The thing I didn't realize before getting involved in this work is that so many sheriff's positions are elected. And guess who is really heavily involved in electing sheriffs? The NRA. And so often they are an opposing force. For example, in Colorado, where I've lived, they have created sanctuary cities so they don't have to follow any gun laws passed by the state lawmakers there. So there is still that interesting rub between sheriffs and police on this issue.
Do y'all have any conversations with gun manufacturers and for them to take some level of responsibility for their guns and up, as in handguns especially?
No. Gun manufacturers aren't really interested right now. They don't feel like they need to come to the middle on this issue because they've had so much protection from lawmakers for so long. I've been working on this now 6.5 years, and maybe once in that entire time have I seen gun manufacturers or the gun lobby support anything. And it was the Fix NICS bill after the Sutherland Springs shooting. It was a very small baby step, and I think they felt so overwhelmed by public outrage that they felt they had to do something, and that was better than the ramifications of doing nothing. But gun manufacturers and the gun lobby do not want anything to do with smart gun technology or tracing guns. In fact, the NRA fights us in every state legislature just to make it the law that gun owners have to report when a gun is lost or stolen, which is the genesis of so many crime guns in this country. And yet the gun lobby opposes making that the law.
Can you talk a little bit about your research and data for those who push for guns in school as keeping students safer?
So every year we fight laws across the country that would require teachers to be armed. Again, arming just a fraction of the millions of teachers in this country would be a huge cash cow for gun manufacturers, and that's why we see them trying to do it over and over again. And they have succeeded in some states. The idea that we're going to turn educators into sharpshooters is absurd. Educators oppose this, police oppose this. Again, lawmakers don't listen. When you look at the data, police officers are able to hit a moving target, shoot them successfully with about less than 30% chance of acuity. Imagine now putting a gun in the hand of a cafeteria worker. Like, this is not what they signed up for. So it is something that is opposed by educators and police and parents and even students, and yet we see the gun lobby pushing this hard. So we show up and fight it wherever it is, and I always say, when you close the door, moms come in the window. In Florida, they just passed a law that allows teachers to be armed, so we went school district by school district. 80% of students now live in a district that has said we won't allow our teachers to be armed. Yes.
And many times, or even the case of a police officer shooting somebody they never should have shot because they were worried about that shot, like that whole
yes.
And it just seems logical that that organization would support getting guns, more gun legislation.
I mean, again, it's a little bit of what I answered the other question. I mean, we are seeing overwhelming police support, but there are, just like in any segment of society, there are officers who have bought into the NRA's rhetoric. I can remember I called the police when I started receiving threats after I started Moms Demand Action, and the police officer came to the door, I explained what's happened, and he said, well, that's what you get when you mess with the Second Amendment, ma'am. So, some of it is changing hearts and minds and educating people because, I would argue there are even some police officers who don't realize how crime guns are used against police and how we have the power to stop that.
Have you worked on any bills or had any experience talking with law enforcement or border control about demilitarizing? Because police officers are 2 to 4 times more likely to be domestic violence abusers.
So in terms of removing the guns from domestic abusers' hands, that's the legislation I talked about earlier, which is broadening what the definition of domestic abuser is. Right now, federal law does not include stalkers or dating partners. Most women in this country are actually killed by dating partners because they're waiting longer to get married. About 50% that domestic abuse against a dating partner does not make you a prohibited gun purchaser is absurd. That would actually be a provision of VAWA right now. So if Senator McConnell would allow a vote on the Violence Against Women Act, that issue would be addressed. But we haven't seen that yet. The other piece that we have to work on with domestic gun violence is to go into states and put teeth in the laws that allow police to remove the guns a domestic abuser already has. So just making them a prohibited purchaser isn't enough. You have to then remove the guns that they already own. So that's something that we work on in every single state. In terms of sort of demilitarizing and shoot to kill, we've been experimenting with different laws on that issue. So Florida is the NRA's petri dish. They go into Florida and pass the worst laws you can think of, hoping they'll work, and then they try to extrapolate them to the rest of the country. California is our petri dish. So we go into California and we try to pass stronger gun laws, and one we just passed recently increases the standard for which police have to use in order to shoot to kill. And so we're waiting now to see what kind of data comes out and is that effective.
You mentioned about data being data-driven. I thought there were some issues with funding for the CDC studying gun violence. Can you speak about that?
So back in the 90s, the CDC came out with a study that showed that just having a gun in your home made it more likely that you or someone in your home would die. I can pretty much figure that out without having done any research myself, but the NRA did not like that. And so they were able to pass through Congress a law that essentially defunded the CDC and prevented them from studying gun violence. The NRA learned a lot from other special interests, tobacco, alcohol. One of them was to defund gun violence research. The other was to pass something called preemption laws. 40 states have them. They don't allow cities to make laws that are different from state laws, right? So most states are run by Republicans. They're not a gun majority, so they pass the laws the cities have to follow. Cities can't do what's good for them. That benefits the NRA. And then the other thing that they learned from other special interests was a bill or a law called PLACA. So you can't sue gun manufacturers for liability. They're not liable. They're the only industry that you can't sue them for product malfunctions or misuse. But certainly gun violence research was something they learned that the more research there was, the more harmful it was to their power. And that's why we see so many universities taking this on. UC Davis, Johns Hopkins, our organization does a ton of research, but really until we can get federal funding again, we don't know exactly what's causing our crisis and exactly how to solve it or even how big it is. The House did pass a bill that would allocate $50 million to gun violence research, but if Mitch McConnell will allow a vote on it is anyone's guess.
Just as a follow-up to the discussion around arming teachers, has Randy Weingarten come out and said anything on this?
So the question is about how teachers' organizations have gotten involved. Randy Weingarten is a huge supporter of Moms to Me in Action and vice versa. We work together hand in glove, not just on arming teachers, but something I want to make sure I address before we wrap up. I want to talk about lockdown drills really quick, if that's okay. And this is something we've worked with Randy and the PTA and others on. I'm seeing all these tweets because it's a new school year and people are sending, their kindergartners to school where they have to sit in a closet and essentially rehearse their deaths. And we didn't take a position on lockdown drills for a long time because we didn't have data or research telling us which direction to go. We have it now. And the data shows us that lockdown drills do not enhance the outcomes for children when children go through these drills. the data does show that they cause anxiety and depression in American children. Does that shock anyone? And we are seeing them become more and more obscene. In Indiana, they're trying to pass a bill that will allow teachers to be shot with rubber bullets during an active shooter drill so they feel the adrenaline. We see children having fake blood on them and lying in the hallways to act as though they had been killed. Recently in California, the superintendent hired a stranger to put on a mask and go door to door and rattle the doors without telling faculty or students that that was going to happen. So if I had to do it all over again, and my kids are all adults now, but if I had to do over again, my kids would not be participating in lockdown drills. I would suggest you have those conversations with your lawmakers, with your superintendent, with your school board, because you need to know the content and the tone. You deserve to know when they're going to happen, and you really should have an opportunity to opt out if you want to. Because again, this shouldn't be the new norm. Instead of asking students to stand up to gunmen, we should be asking our lawmakers to stand up to the gun lobby. So, do we have time? Okay, one more question.
Shannon, the last 18 months while I've been involved with mom, I've come to the decision that the D needs to be dropped from PTSD because it isn't a disorder. It's actually a normal reaction to trauma.
Yeah.
And I think this whole country right now is suffering PTS. And in particular, we're delivering it to our children in those kind of drills. Has the psychology community come out at all and said, what are you doing here?
Well, I mean, this data is somewhat new, but certainly we have psychologists who understand that these drills are traumatizing not just to children, but to teachers as well. This new norm of absurd drills and over-the-top drills is particularly damaging. And I would agree with you. I mean, I was really shocked to not see many hands go up that have been impacted by gun violence, because at least 50% of Americans know someone or have been involved in some kind of gun violence situation. And we are a nation that has been traumatized, even if you haven't been firsthand, even just watching the news. I mean, there isn't a parent in this country who isn't afraid that their child will be next. And that is not how we should be living. We shouldn't stand for it. So thank you. Thank you so much. This was wonderful.
So again, on behalf of the League, thank you all for joining us today. If you arrived late or haven't picked up your book, you can see Libby or Paige, and they're happy to give it to you. And Shannon will be here for a little bit longer if you'd like to get it signed. And again, thank you all, and we'll hope to see you at one of our next events soon.